So The Seeds of Death is a serial that I originally really liked, but on a rewatch found it less interesting. It's not bad, but I think my opinion of it and Brian Hales' previous serial have switched somewhat. But let's find out why that might be as we get into the serial. So let's begin with giving some context and explaining the serial's world building, as that is a key element of explaining the plot. So in the near future, Earth has abandoned rocketry and instead replaced it with TMAT, a system designed to transport people, food, anything across the world in a matter of seconds. So this is an interesting idea for a serial to explore, how humanity's desire to explore has been replaced by convenience. This is of course an idea which has some relevance today, with us existing in an era where life is being more and more convenient with the prevalence of the internet, and how the world itself has been explored to the point where it's not something the average person can do. This is probably worth its own video, but I'll make the obvious comparison of how food is sent across the world with the use of TMAT, much like ordering food online and having it delivered to your door. There are some parallels here, but the serial isn't about that aspect of TMAT, which is perhaps unfortunate as all these years later with the world we live in, where that sort of lifestyle is taking hold. So the TMAT system is operated entirely from England, with there being a base on the moon which is crucial to operations, with it being impossible to use the system if the moon base is offline. So one problem I have with this is I don't believe for a minute that the world will have agreed to the system. Now the operators do call it foolproof, but even if I stretch my disbelief that the entire world would have accepted that as fact, I do not believe for a moment that all of the countries would have allowed it to be completely controlled from a single country that wasn't their own. Now you might argue that the control room we see is one of many, but it's referred to as Earth Control, which means this is clearly the only one. This is of course a key part of the serial, as how TMAT operates and affects the world in both a practical and commercial way is important. Now let's talk about the moon base and get onto the villains, as they go together. So the moon base acts as a relay which allows for the TMAT system to operate at all, with there being no way to use it while moon base is either offline or out of communication, with it being operated by a small crew of about half a dozen. There is an emergency TMAT system to get to the moon in case of failure, although if the system is foolproof then why was it even considered and put there? But anyway, so the presence of the moon base gives a great setting for the serial, as having the villains being able to siege the Earth from a location like this works incredibly well, and it kind of gives a sense of what would have happened in the moon base if the Cybermen did manage to take the base permanently. So having gone over the setting a bit, let's talk about the villains of the serial, which episode 1 goes out of its way to hide the identity of until the cliffhanger, which has its pros and cons, mostly due to some of the choices the director chose to hide the villains, through a lot of POV shots which look incredibly weird for the show, especially when an actor is looking straight into camera. But that's enough on the direction and onto the reveal of the villains, who turn out to be the Ice Warriors, making their grand return to the show. So obviously the director wanted to make the reveal a surprise, with only the Ice Warriors' voices being present until the cliffhanger, which shows them in full. But the problem is that since the Ice Warriors have a presence throughout the episode, it means that there are long drawn out scenes that suffer because of the way the director chose to hide them. But it's a very distracting decision that really took me out of the episode while I was watching it. So now let's actually talk about the Ice Warriors themselves, instead of the camera work of an episode. So the Warriors are quite different in this one, with us getting a better look into them as a military, with them having a definitive leader in the form of Slar, who has a completely different appearance to the rest of the Warriors. It's clear from this that he is the leader, with him not being an armoured warrior, instead someone who gives orders in the background, which again has its pros and cons. This choice does mean that there is less character for the Ice Warriors in this, with Slar really being the only one with any sort of personality or a notable amount of lines, which is completely different to the previous Ice Warriors serial, where there were multiple personalities. This does hurt the Ice Warriors here and makes them feel a bit more generic and one note than they previously were. I don't really have anything to say about Slar though, as he isn't the most memorable character within the serial. On the Ice Warriors' plan, it's a conquest of Earth compared to the trying to leave Earth of last time. So they plan to do this by using TMAT to send seed pods to the planet, where they will explode and spread spores, which will remove all of the planet's oxygen, with it spreading as a foam across the planet. So this of course allows for some great visuals when the foam is conquering the planet, with seed pods exploding in fields. It's a cool enough plan, and I like that it focuses on a strategy which doesn't use force to conquer the planet, with it instead showing their ability to plan ahead and use patience to win in the longer term, which does make the Ice Warriors stand out a bit against the many other villains of the show. Obviously this plan had to fail in order for them to be defeated, and this is through the means of water, specifically using rain to destroy the foam, which makes the idea of them invading England seem very funny, although this is where the serial has another bit of world building, that being a weather control system on Earth itself, again potentially controlled entirely from England, an Ice Warrior being sent to Earth to disable it, which leads to the Doctor having to repair it towards the end. I'll discuss their full defeat in a bit, but I want to move on to characters, beginning with the humans. So we've got quite a full cast with varying degrees of importance. There are 5 characters of importance, with 2 of them being on the moon base and 3 on Earth. So let's begin with the moon base crew, as they are less important overall. So the 2 moon base characters are Fusham and Phipps. I'll talk about Phipps first because he dies first and does the least. So Phipps is able to escape from the control room and sets up a trap to protect himself from the Ice Warriors, while also helping the trio on the moon through first assisting them in landing and then taking them through the base to key areas. He ultimately dies trying to warn Zoe, with him being shot by an Ice Warrior, although the way it's set up makes it feel like he should have been able to easily survive. He's a good character but not the strongest of the 2 moon base characters, although does a good job at being the one to assist the trio in their efforts to defeat the Ice Warriors early, and gives the Doctor an idea to create a portable version of his trap to fight the Ice Warriors at the weather control station. I note that this is is a solar energy device which can project heat, and it vaporizes the Ice Warriors when they are exposed to it, and presumably anyone else who's caught in the beams. On Fushim, he is a very interesting character, entirely due to how his actions are all determined by his desire to survive, with him siding with the Ice Warriors out of fear, and later turning on them when he comes to his senses. Right from the start, the serial shows that Fushim is acting out of fear for his own survival, both in terms of his general performance and the more overt saying it. This leads to him having to commit more and more acts which he doesn't want to, and that disturbs him, with the big one being forced to use T-Mat to send the Doctor into outer space after he's been exposed to a seed pod. This does fail due to Jamie getting the Doctor out at the last moment, although Fushim's unwillingness to do it is what buys the others enough time to enact the rescue. Then towards the end of the serial, he returns everyone to Earth using T-Mat and says he will follow using the delay, but he doesn't, and this is due to him both knowing the fate that he awaits, and so he can reveal details of the Ice Warriors' plan to Earth through the use of the video link. This does mean he actually gets a heroic death, and is somewhat redeemed from helping the Ice Warriors for the majority of it. Out of the guest cast, he's probably the most interesting because of this, as he's the only one who develops, although there isn't much competition there. Now for the Earth characters, and we'll begin with the most boring of them, that being the supervisor of T-Mat control, Radnor. So Radnor is more a tool in terms of how his character is used, with him being responsible for getting things going in the early episodes, and then just being there for the rest, with him getting some back and forth with Eldred. He isn't the most interesting at all, with him not having a strong personality like the rest of the cast. I don't really have anything to say about him because of this, but he's too important to not mention, given he's the one who gets the characters in the position where they were able to go to the moon, and does make some other odd decisions from time to time, notably when he prevents Miss Kelly from going to the moon, even though she's the only one with the expertise to fix T-Mat alone. But beyond that, he spends most of the serial on Earth, waiting around for the Ice Warriors to be defeated. Next is Eldred, who is far more interesting, but like with Radnor, is most important in the first few episodes. So Eldred is the owner of a space museum, which the TARDIS lands in, and is an expert on rocketry, with him having designed one, the most advanced rocket ever built, but it never really got off the ground due to the invention of T-Mat. A lot of the funniest moments come in the earlier parts when he's talking with the Doctor about rocketry, and the two are just like kids. And most of the scenes with Radnor, with him being the more well-defined one of the two. But the bit I want to bring up that's important about him is that he is the one responsible for getting the trio to the moon, in one of the oddest ways the show has ever gotten characters from A to B, with him having built the Ironjet rocket he designed in essentially his back garden. So this is definitely a very silly bit of the serial, and since it's such a key aspect it's hard to overlook. The fact that this guy has been able to build a fully functioning rocket by himself with his own funds while owning a museum, which people have no interest in, is just baffling. It's one of the worst writing decisions in the serial, and it's so important and yet so nonsensical. The last human we have is Miss Kelly, who is by far the best written in this serial. While she doesn't have a rich backstory which she feels important, with her being important to several key events, notably the restoring of and the continued operations of T-Mat in the later episodes. She is responsible for the operations of T-Mat prior to the events of the serial as a top person, with her being the one with the most expertise on the device, which is interesting, especially since it seems she understands it better than her supervisor. Beyond that, she wants to go to the moon with the trio, but is not allowed, which means she was prepared to do the repairs over the radio, which seems rather stupid, but that comes down to her supervisor being a supervisor. Beyond that, we have her standing up to the Ice Warriors while on the moon and being involved with the trio when she arrives there, assisting them with their plan to retake the base. Then once back on Earth, she is the one who organises the launch of a satellite to use T-Mat again in a limited fashion to keep food supplies moving. While the other characters really only had some importance in the earlier parts of the serial, during the entire thing, Miss Kelly is well used with her being crucial to several events, which makes her really stand out. Miss Kelly is perhaps the best written female character we've had since Anne Travers in The Web of Fear, with her being far more than just the woman involved. Having someone who has a similar level of intelligence as Zoe is something unique for the show during this season, which really makes her stand out. Of course, we don't get much about her outside of her working life, but I think she's handled well enough that doesn't matter. So now on to the trio. We'll begin with Jamie as he feels the least well used. With a serial featuring villains who are physically powerful, it means he can't fight them in hand-to-hand combat. And due to the structure of the serial, there is a lot of sciencey stuff, which means he can't be too useful there. This does limit him in the serial, but he works well as the audience avatar here. He does get his heroic moment when he saves the Doctor from the T-Mat cubicle, plus towards the end is the one who buys Zoe time to get the Doctor into the weather control facility. It's a fine enough showing for Jamie, but not his greatest ever, although it does have this.
Hey, never signs this one, Doc.
Yes, right, right, Jamie, that's a...
Oh, Doctor, look!
You dodge.
Next is Zoe, who is interesting here. I say interesting because this serial uses her very well with her memory and her ability to operate complex machinery, such as being the main operator of the rocket. But the odd thing about her in this serial is that she is written with a somewhat lack of emotion, or rather her bluntness that comes from this. This is weird, as it feels a lot more like the Zoe we had during The Wheel in Space, making it feel like this story comes a lot earlier in the timeline, as she hasn't really grown her emotional side, which she lacked somewhat back then. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does feel a bit regressive for her. It does make her stand out against many previous companions, with this lack of emotion compared to the over-emotional, but it would have worked better if this serial had been the second or maybe third serial. At serial 5 it's a bit too late, as we've seen her more human side develop. Fortunately, this does allow her to show the logical side to her as its full, with her being really proactive in the earlier parts, with her having a lot to do with the rocket in flight and once landed, alongside being involved in some more actiony scenes, like when she has to sneak through the air ducts to adjust the temperature controls to stop the Ice Warriors. This plotline also gives her a bit of chance for development, with her helping Phipps when he's having problems in the air ducts when he's forgotten the route. So obviously it needed to come earlier, but this is a really good serial for her. Finally, we have the Doctor, who is of course as great as ever. We have his comedic side on display, his scientific side, and his playing the fool. We've got almost all of his sides on display here, with the exception of his more emotional side, as there aren't really any scenes for that. Seeing him face the Ice Warriors again, but a story where he can go more head to head with them, really lets him shine. He didn't really get to confront the Ice Warriors until the very end of the previous serial, but this time he meets them around halfway through, with a confrontation where his own curiosity ends with him nearly being killed. This scene does exist to give Troughton a holiday, which means that the Doctor spends an entire episode unconscious, but that episode flies by, as it lets the characters find ways to fight the Ice Warriors by themselves and strengthens them. Once he's back in action though, he gets a lot done, with him spending time figuring out how to destroy the sea pods and foam, before moving on to stopping the Ice Warriors, which involves one of his most deadly schemes. So I'll talk about the Doctor's plan now, as this is the most appropriate part. So after defeating the Ice Warrior on Earth and taking the weather station back, the Doctor returns to the moon base to stop the Ice Warriors' fleet. This is a two-stage plan. The first is to use a satellite to send a copy of the Ice Warriors' signal to change their course, while at the same time turning off the signal on the moon. The plan is to make the Ice Warriors' fleet fly into the sun, which obviously destroys them. This is probably one of the darkest plans the Doctor has ever used against anyone, especially a race who aren't pure evil like the Daleks. I think the fact that this serial has the Ice Warriors as more generic evil villains rather than the more explored creatures from their last appearance really helps this genocidal event to slide off your mind. Either way, it's one of this incarnation's darker moments. With that wrapped up, let's get on to the behind the scenes stuff, which I only have two things to discuss. The first being this script's origins, as this wasn't the original Ice Warrior script submitted by Hales for this season. Instead he had another called Lords of the Red Planet, which went over the origins of the Ice Warriors on Mars. As far as I know, there isn't a stated or exact reason for why the script was scrapped, but it was probably due to the budget concerns, as the script has been adapted into an audio drama, which gives an idea of how ambitious it would have been. It's unfortunate it wasn't made, as it feels like it fits more with the previous Ice Warriors serial than this one does. The final thing I want to talk about is an odd coincidence in terms of the serial's director. So this serial was directed by Michael Ferguson, with this being his second Doctor Who story as director, with his previous one being The War Machines. The reason this is an odd coincidence is because both of these serials are the third to last serials of their incarnations. Might just be something I care about, but I think it's interesting that this occurred, especially since they're his only credits for these incarnations. So overall, The Seeds of Death is a bit of a step down from the Ice Warriors. There is a greater scale of action to the serial, but the characters aren't as strong for the most part. It has a lot of fun moments and great ideas, but the villains are really lacking compared to before. Not to mention the few silly things which happen towards the beginning to get the serial going. It does feel like a step up from the Crotons, although still quite off the strongest of this season. But next time, it's the Space Pirates, you know what we're in for.